Welcome. This is the one and only nation written in the stars. This is part 3 of this video series entitled The Nation of Divine Destiny Fully Revealed. Here you see the breastplate stones of the remnant tribes of Israel. This was from an earlier video series that we did on the breastplate. And a lot that is in this video series ties back to that earlier video series. So we're not reteaching a lot of things that have already been taught about the tribes. If you want all that information, go to the link that we have there on the screen and see the earlier series as well. Today we're talking about the zodiac. And the interesting thing about the zodiac is it still preserves the original star signs of the Creator. In the Bible, this setup of stars around the earth is called the Mazzaroth. And the constellations that are in the Mazzaroth were originally used in a great timekeeping device that Yahweh put into the sky for keeping track of months and years and even days. And since it was composed of stars, it was, of course, a created thing. It was created when the world was created. And the scriptures tell us that all of these stars, including these constellations, were called by their names by Yahweh. He is the one that made these constellations. This is important for us to realize as we look at the zodiac, because even though the zodiac is used for purposes of astrology, which is an abuse of the zodiac, astronomers reference the signs of the zodiac for purposes completely different than astrology. And that's what we're going to do today. We are referencing the signs of the zodiac unrelated to astrology, simply to understand these signs as Yahweh made them. So we're not going to get into a lot of Greek mythology and all of that sort of thing. We're just interested in these signs as they match up to the scriptures. This is what we're getting at. And since we know that Yahweh created and named the constellations, these pictographic signs in the zodiac still preserve the original star signs of the Mazzaroth as given by the Creator because He created them. Now, just to show you why we believe this is worth doing is looking at these signs which clearly match the scriptures. Here you have the constellations of what we call today Leo, Taurus, Aquarius, and Scorpio. A lion, an ox, a man, and a scorpion. But the image is a little different because really Scorpio features eagles. Includes scorpions, but it features eagles, and we're going to get into that and explain this fully to you later. But the important point right here is how this matches up to Scripture, because in Revelation chapter 4, it tells us about the beings in heaven. And they are around the throne, much like you see here, these constellations are around the earth. And the first living being was like a lion. The second living being was like an ox. The third living being had a face like a man. And the fourth living being was like a flying eagle, clearly matching up with these signs of the Mazzaroth. And so we see here the same setup in heaven, and instead of being the signs of the Mazzaroth, it's the 4 angels of the presence, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel. And these are represented by these same signs as we were seeing in the Mazzaroth. So obviously those match up, but then it goes a step further, and in the scriptures, it assigns these same signs to these division leaders, Judah, Joseph, Reuben, and Dan. This is what we find in Numbers chapter 2 And that's because, as it says in Hebrews chapter 8, verse 5, Israel is a very unique nation and is really a copy and shadow of the heavenly things. So the tribes of Israel mirror heaven. And all of this, of course, is seen in the signs of the zodiac. So we were wondering, is this true of the other tribes too, or just these four? Well, we went through the first three tribes in the first division in our last video, and this is where we ended up. As you can see, Judah, Zebulun, and Issachar match up with these three tribes in the breastplate of the high priest. You'll want to see that video if you haven't yet in order to see how that works. Then we went into the second division, again comparing the Maseroth with the breastplate of the high priest, and we have these same three tribes once again, Joseph, Benjamin, and Manasseh. So this brings us now to the third division. And this is marked out here on the breastplate, the third division. We're looking for Reuben, Simeon, and Gad. Let's see if that's what we find. Let's compare division 3 of the breastplate and the Maseroth. So here we are, the first sign of the third division, and this matches up with Reuben, the division leader. And in Genesis 49, we have Jacob, or Israel's, blessing on Reuben. And he said, Reuben, my firstborn son, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. It sounds great, but then it says unstable as water. And we have the history of Reuben. I'm not going to totally go into it here, but while he had all of these qualities and he was the firstborn son, he was in line for the firstborn blessings, but he forfeited all of that because he could not control his emotional life, which was unstable as water. When we look at the sign Aquarius, we have a man pouring out water. Very, very similar to Reuben, certainly matches up with Reuben. This is the constellation known as Aquarius, the star sign known as Aquarius. And this certainly matches up with Reuben, the very first sign that we look at in the third division. Now we come to this funky looking thing, this goat fish creature called Capricorn. When I first looked at this, I'm thinking, what could this possibly be? And amazingly, what I found out about this is that Capricorn is really a crocodile. Now imagine that you're from Greece where they don't have crocodiles, but you visit Egypt, you see these big crocodiles, and you go back to Greece and you're trying to explain what a crocodile is. Well, you might say something like, well, it has a mean disposition like a goat, and it's really part a water creature, but it's also on land. You might end up with something like this weird mythical creature called Capricorn. However, in India, where they do have crocodiles, this same sign is known as Makara. It means sea dragon or water monster. And it's actually the origin of the Hindi word for crocodile. And according to the Wikipedia article, Makara is equivalent to the zodiac sign Capricorn. So Capricorn was originally a crocodile. That is the actual sign. And if you look at Capricorn, it really looks like a crocodile's mouth open, about to devour you. And the question is, does this match up with Simeon? Well, Simeon has the black stone on the breastplate, and that's not a good sign, right? Because black has always been the sign of evil, or the color of evil. And unfortunately, Simeon was a killer. And Simeon and his brother Levi wiped out a whole city of men. Now, those people were not good people and they did bad things, but they weren't all involved, just some of them were. And Simeon and Levi were so angry that they killed all the men in the tribe. And of Simeon, Jacob said, in their anger they killed men. Cursed be the anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. Surely a crocodile is a very good creature to have as a star sign of this fierceness, of this killing cruelty. We have in our picture here a 1-ton crocodile man-killer, which is captured in Uganda, Africa. And an interesting comment from Wikipedia under crocodile attacks says this: crocodile attacks on humans are common in places where large crocodilians are native and human populations live. It has been estimated that about 1,000 people are killed by crocodilians each year, and it certainly is a death that is fierce and cruel. So this is our next sign, the sign of Capricorn, and it matches up with Simeon very well. This is what it looks like now in the Mazzaroth. We're filling out the Mazzaroth, and we're getting a much better picture of what all of these signs are and how they match up now to the tribes of Israel. But we do have now another sign in this third division, the division of Reuben. Let's look at that. Sagittarius. Here's another weird mythical creature, right? Part horse, part man. And interestingly, this particular sign is also simply known as the archer without this weird creature. Just a person who is an archer. And this is the original sign of Sagittarius, an archer shooting arrows. And as you can see with this particular archer, he has a lot of arrows. Sometimes Sagittarius was once shown as simply a large amount of arrows, such as an army might use. So this is Sagittarius. Now, this is in the place where we would expect Gad to be. So we wonder, does this in any way link up with Gad? Well, here we have this represented in our Mazzaroth reproduction here. Genesis 49:19 says this of Gad. Once again, this is Jacob speaking, describing Gad. Gad, a troop shall overcome him, but he shall overcome at the last. So it's a battle for Gad, but in the end, he wins. And it's kind of interesting, one feature that's famous about Gad is mentioned in this Wikipedia article. Sagittarius famously points its arrow at the heart of Scorpius, represented by the reddish star Antares, as the two constellations race around the sky. Now, we're going to talk about Scorpio next, but we're going to find out, as you might expect, Scorpio is not a good guy. He's a bad guy. And Gad has his arrow pointed at the heart of Scorpius, suggesting that he will overcome in the end. So that is how Sagittarius very easily links up with Gad. So here we have completed this third division. We have Reuben, who is a man, and in the breastplate he links up with a stone that is a flesh-colored stone. Very interesting. And in the scripture, Reuben is described as the firstborn son, certainly a man, and unstable as water, connected up with water, pouring out his emotions rather than controlling himself. Perfect representation for Reuben in the stars in the Mazzaroth. We have Simeon, who unfortunately was a killer in anger, cruel and fierce, represented by a crocodile and matching up with the black stone in the breastplate in this third division. And finally, we have Gad. Gad matching up to the purple stone. Purple not only picturing royalty, but actually picturing victory, and very much matching up with the star sign we call Sagittarius, the archer, all set to overcome. So do these match? Yes, it matches perfectly in the third division. This leaves for us just one more division to look at. And I think in some ways this is the most interesting of all of these four divisions. And it's a little more complex than some of the others that we looked at, but it pays off looking into this. So we have now the division of the eagle. And we're going to look now at this fourth division. Here it is in the breastplate. We see the tribes. Here we have the first division that is led by the eagle. We have then Asher and Naphtali. Well, why aren't I naming the first division? Because there's more to this, as I said. So let's get into that. We'll look at this fourth division. Scorpio. Even as you look at these stars, they look like a scorpion, don't they? About to strike. And Scorpio, the scorpion, is the sign of the tribe of Dan, which is the division leader here in the book of Numbers. When Israel was going out in the wilderness, this fourth division was led by the tribe of Dan, represented here by the scorpion. Genesis 49:17 says, Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a Shephaphon by the path. Now, I'm using that particular word, which is the original word there. This is the only place in Scripture where this word is used. Serpent by the way, a Shephaphon by the path, that strikes the horse's heels so that its rider falls backwards. Now, in most Bibles, it makes this some kind of a snake. Some Bibles say an adder. Some Bibles say a horned snake, and other similar kinds of guesses. But they're just guesses, and here's the reason. Here's another kind, a cerastes. A cerastes upon the track, Shephaphon, which is nowhere else to be found in the Bible, is thus translated by the Vulgate. This is from Adam Clark's commentary. So the Vulgate now was written hundreds of years after the Scriptures were closed with the books we now have in them. And the Vulgate is a Latin translation. And this word was an archaic word. And so this is just a guess by the Vulgate. And then ever since then, other translators, not having a better guess, just went with the guess that they made in the Vulgate. So really, when they're saying a horned snake or an asp or whatever kind of snake they're choosing here, they're just guessing. That's the facts here. So let's look at this word, Shephaphon, and what we find is it comes from a word that actually means to snap at. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think of snakes as snapping. We have some that rattle, but I don't think snap. They do strike, though, and they do bite, but snapping, not so much. However, scorpions, they snap. Here's something I read in an article where they were doing some experimentation with scorpions. They wanted to find out which kind of scorpion snapped the fastest. And here's what it said. Of all the scorpions studied, the death stalker took top prize in terms of its lightning-like efficiency, snapping its tail at nearly 3 miles per hour or 130 centimeters per second. That's snapping, friends. That's what snapping is. That quick strike. As a matter of fact, I think when you think of scorpions and what they do, the word snapping comes to mind almost immediately. And every movie I've ever seen about scorpions, they're all snapping. So I think what Israel may have been describing here is two different kinds of creatures instead of just snakes. I think he was speaking of a snake, which is very sneaky. That's what this is about. It's being very sneaky. But the Shephaphon is no doubt a type of one of these scorpions. We don't know exactly what kind, okay? But probably known back then in those ancient times to Israel when he suggested that Dan was like a Shephaphon that strikes the horse's heels. So Dan is described as a snake and a scorpion if you understand this word to be snapping, if that comes across to you as a scorpion. Now, we do have more about this that I think is interesting. Here's where we're now picturing this picture with Dan in this particular role. And you see we've put up a different image now to represent Dan as a scorpion and as a snake. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a Shephaphon by the path that strikes the horse's heels so that its rider falls backwards. What more can we say about that? It really seems like Dan should be the division leader here. And there's nothing about an eagle here, right? Well, we haven't got into that part yet. Here's the bigger picture. This is what you see if you look at these signs that are connected with Scorpio in the stars. So we see we have the scorpion, but then we have a hero treading on the scorpion. And you notice we have Aquila, which is the Latin word for eagle, swooping in to assist in this battle against the snake and the scorpion. And look at Luke 10:19. This is where Messiah said to his disciples, I give you authority to tread on snakes and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy. Nothing will in any way hurt you. So, interestingly, this Mazzaroth sign is more complex than just the scorpion. As you can see, it actually involves treading on the snake and the scorpion and a battle going on between the eagle, along with our hero here, against the snake and the scorpion. And the snake, notice, is going for the crown. That's the object of the battle. It involves usurping. Well, as a believer who understands the scriptures, you'd have to look at this hero who is known as Ophukas as being actually Yeshua Messiah, trampling on the snake and the scorpion. And really, who else could give authority to his disciples to do the same but the Messiah who already had that authority? So this is kind of an amazing picture written in the stars of the battle between Israel with its champion, the Messiah of Israel. And we see here the eagle assisting in the battle. We know that Gad has its arrow pointed at the scorpion. We already talked about that. This is, in this particular place, in the Mazzaroth, what this is about is this battle, not just the scorpion. The scorpion represents the enemy here, but there's more to this, as you can see. Well, how does Levi fit into this? Replacing the scorpion. Now, how does that happen? Dan is replaced by Levi in the last days. We know this in Scripture. We find this in Revelation chapter 7, where the 144,000 are sealed out of every tribe of the children of Israel. Now, the fact that it says every is very important because it means this is all the tribes that are included, every tribe. And as you read through these verses, what you find is all the tribes are there except Dan is removed and Levi is the one that's taking his place, or Levi, if you prefer that pronunciation. But it's interesting here that in the camp in the wilderness, Levi was in the middle, so was not counted with the other 12 tribes. But here in the last days, Levi is counted with the 12 tribes, but Dan is completely missing. Dan has been replaced by Levi in the last days. Revelation chapter 7 is about the last days, tribes of Israel. Now, one other thing I want to say about this, we will be getting into this more, but you notice that all these tribes that are in the Mazzaroth, they're all listed here. It does use Joseph instead of Ephraim, but really there's no difference there functionally. The tribes are listed there with the exception of Dan. And Judah is listed by itself, but then there's all these other tribes. I want to suggest to you that we are at a point now in the last days where although Judah is in the land and has restored, in that sense, Israel to the land of Israel, that all these other tribes still need to come home. This is the land assigned to all these tribes of Israel. And that's what this is about in Revelation chapter 7, drawing on many other prophecies that we're going to get into. All of the tribes are important, not just Judah. Judah goes out first, and Judah did go out first and reclaim that land for Israel. And we just thank Yahweh, the God of Israel, that that happened. We're totally in support of that. I am totally in support of that. However, the rest of the tribes have to come home. They're going to come home in a very organized way that is going to glorify the God of Israel. And we do want to talk about that more. You need to understand this because this is very, very important. And it involves this battle that you're looking at here that has gone on for many, many centuries and is going to come to its conclusion very shortly. So here's what we've got. We start out in the breastplate with Dan occupying that first place, the division commander place, followed then by Asher and Naphtali. However, Levi replaces Dan, and we know that by looking at the list in the book of Revelation, chapter 7. So how does that happen? How does Dan get replaced by Levi? Well, this involves the history of Israel a little bit, so we're going to talk about this basically briefly. You see, what happened a long time ago, almost 3,000 years ago, is that all the tribes, except at that time of Benjamin, broke off from Judah, which was the leader, the leading tribe, and specifically from the house of David, which was the ruling family, given an everlasting covenant for a house and a kingdom from Yahweh. And these other nations called the 10 tribes, these other tribes, separated away and formed their own nation. This is what they did. And 1 Kings chapter 12 talks about this. It says, so Israel rebelled against David's house to this day. Still true, friends. Israel made Jeroboam king over all Israel. There was no one who followed David's house except for the tribe of Judah only. So this is how the tribes came to separate from Judah. In some ways, you could look at this as the origin of the Jews as a nation of their own. And when they separated away, the king thought, if they keep going up to Jerusalem to worship Yahweh, then they're going to end up going back to Judah. So what he did is he set up 2 calves of gold in 2 places, in Bethel and in Dan, places within the new kingdom of Israel. So that's what he did. He set up these false gods, these calves in these 2 places. But it really caught on so that the people actually preferred Dan. It says the people went to worship before the one as far as Dan. In other words, even though it was far away, that's where they were gravitating to. And it says about Dan, he made houses of high places and made priests from among all the people who were not of the sons of Levi. So what Dan did is he actually violated the appointment that had been made by Yahweh to be priests to all the tribes of Israel. And he subverted that and took over the role of Levi by setting up priests that were not of the tribe of Levi. Now, this was a very, very bad thing because Levi had a covenant and has a covenant with Yahweh to represent Yahweh in a special way, to represent really the covenant that exists between Israel and Yahweh. And Dan now was really usurping that, trying to take that away from Levi, and in the process, subverting the true worship of Yahweh. Very, very serious, a lot like a snake, a lot like a scorpion. And here in another verse, it kind of continues the story. It says, the priests and the Levites who were in all Israel stood with him, that is the king of Judah, out of all their territory. For the Levites left their pasture lands and their possession and came to Judah and Jerusalem, for Jeroboam and his son cast them off, that they should not execute the priest's office to Yahweh. So this is really a pretty amazing thing that the Levites did, because the Levites had no hereditary possession at all, but they did have possessions in certain cities where they lived, where they were scattered throughout all the tribes of Israel, and they were willing to lose what they had in all those territories in order to continue their covenant. And they did this by returning to Judah, where they could continue the true worship. However, they were cut off effectively by these priests of Dan from all the rest of the tribes of Israel. Well, there's a Torah principle that applies to this situation. Of course, this is how the law actually works in Israel. It's governed by the Torah, the commandments of Yahweh himself that are part of the covenant. Leviticus 24:19 says, if anyone injures his neighbor, as he has done, so shall it be done to him. Now that makes sense, doesn't it? Reciprocity. So if someone injures you, what they did to you has to be done to them. That's how it works. In some cases, even more, by the way. For instance, in cases of willful thievery, in some cases, 4 times has to be paid back. But there's details about that. But the point is, there's reciprocity here. So what happened is Dan injured Levi by taking Levi's place, essentially wiping Levi out from the kingdom of Israel. And according to this Torah principle, then in the restoration, Levi must take Dan's place, wiping Dan out of restored Israel. That's why the listing in Revelation chapter 7 about the last days and the tribes of Israel leaves Dan out because of this Torah principle. And Dan then, in acting in this way, is removed from that position as the division leader. And in fact, just as Levi was removed from the tribes, so Dan is removed from the tribes. Dan did turn out to be a snake, a scorpion, against his brother Levi and against his nation. And what do you do with a snake or a scorpion? You step on it, you tread on it, right? That's the whole picture that we have in this sign. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a Shephaphon by the path, that strikes the horse's heel so that its rider falls backwards. And then the verse says, I have waited for your salvation, Yahweh. You know, this is an interesting exclamation of Jacob, of Israel, when he is giving these blessings of his sons. Because clearly he had prophetically seen that this was going to happen with Dan, that Dan was going to be a traitor. And so he says, I've waited for your salvation, Yahweh. This tells us there's going to be a time that would go by, a time of waiting for Yahweh to set this right. The time for this to be set right is now coming upon us here in these last days. The salvation of Yahweh, the victory over the snake and the serpent. By replacing Dan with Levi, Yahweh saves Israel from a venomous betrayer within the ranks. Now, you might think, oh, the God of Israel would never cast away a tribe of Israel. In that, you're thinking wrong. You're thinking about the Christian God who's always nice to everybody. That's not the God of the Scriptures. Read the Torah. The commandments that apply to Israel are really more stringent than what most people would believe or accept. This is a holy people, this people known as Israel. They have a holy calling in this world. They have a holy mission in this world. And the highest standard applies to Israel. And it's interesting that really in most any family of any size, they all have a betrayer, a traitor, that they have no other recourse but to put out of the family. Even Yeshua, he had 12 disciples that he called, right? Interesting, the number 12, same as the 12 tribes of Israel, same as the 12 signs in the Maseroth, 12. And one of them turned out to be a traitor. This is how it works. King David, his son Absalom, beloved, nevertheless turned out to be a traitor. And in every case, traitors really have to be removed. There's nothing else you can do with a traitor. If you have a scorpion in your shoe, you better get rid of it. If you have a snake in your wood pile, you better get rid of it. And this will tell you something about the holiness of the God of Israel, Yahweh. He won't stand for it. He will not stand for it. He will deal with it. Yes, time can go by, as happened with Dan, before it's dealt with, but you can be sure it will be dealt with. And it's not a happy ending. Now, there might be some individuals from the tribe of Dan, and in the restoration, what happens with them? Well, what I believe is if there are any righteous individuals from the tribe of Dan, they're going to have to connect themselves with a different tribe. It's that simple. Because there will be no tribe of Dan. I can tell you that right now. So here we have this replacing of Dan with Levi. Something, unfortunately, that has to happen, and Yahweh does not hesitate from doing what needs to happen so that renewed Israel in the last days is saved from having a venomous betrayer within its ranks to tear it down and destroy it. This is the picture. Interestingly, when we look at this Scorpius constellation, we find it connected with all kinds of eagles. For instance, it's near the Eagle Nebula, which is like a giant eagle in the sky. We've already seen Aquila, the constellation, which is an eagle, which is attacking the snake and the scorpion in this picture. And even Scorpius itself, the constellation, is connected up with other stars and seen as an eagle, which is interesting. Now, here's an interesting thing, though, about Levi. Some people would say, well, why then would Levi be the one to replace Dan? Because Levi, in the blessing of Israel, is included with Simeon in this horrible blessing, right? In their anger, they killed men. In their self-will, they hamstrung cattle. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. Levi, along with Simeon, started out as a black sheep in the family, rebuked along with Simeon, who's represented by a black stone. How could he actually replace Dan and come into this position? Well, the difference between Levi and we're comparing here Dan is that Levi took that rebuke to heart and rose above it. When Moses blessed the tribes, now he has a completely different blessing for Levi than what Israel, Jacob, had for Levi. Here's that blessing in part, the blessing from Moses. He said of his father and of his mother, I've not seen him. He didn't acknowledge his brothers, nor did he know his own children, for they have observed your word and keep your covenant. Now, what this is saying about Levi is that even their family, when their family turned against God, they turned against their family. Their first loyalty was to Yahweh. And of course, among other things, this is referring to what happened with the golden calf in the wilderness when the people made a golden calf. It ended up being the tribe of Levi that stood with Moses and stood against even those people of their own household to uphold the true worship. Moses goes on speaking about Levi. They shall teach Jacob your ordinances and Israel your Torah. They shall put incense before you and whole burnt offerings on your altar. Now, when it says you, it's talking about Yahweh, the God of Israel. Yahweh, bless his skills, accept the work of his hands. Strike through the hips of those who rise up against him, of those who hate him, that they not rise again. So this really explains how Levi rose up again, because Dan had struck him, taking away his special privilege. It's mentioning here, teaching the ordinances of Israel, teaching the Torah of Israel, and leading in the worship of Israel. And Levi was struck by Dan like a serpent, like a scorpion, and that really activated this blessing, which says, strike through the hips of those who rise up against him, of those who hate him, that they not rise again. Clearly that was fulfilled on Dan, and this is why Dan is not included as a tribe in the last days. So look at the difference between Dan and Levi. Opposite to Dan, Levi took a strong stand against idolatry, even rejecting disloyal family members, and they became the guardians of the covenant and of the Torah. And in rising above, Levi has soared as an eagle, a very, very appropriate sign for Levi. Now, you might object and say, yes, but later on, Levi did this, they did that, and yes, they did. But nevertheless, this is the overall picture of Levi, and this is what we're seeing in this particular star sign. So here it is again, the defeat of Scorpius, the pictographic sign. We see the eagle very prominently included in this battle. Behold, I give you authority to tread on snakes and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy. Nothing will in any way hurt you. This really applies to all believers in Yeshua Messiah who rise up as part of renewed Israel, not only against Dan as a snake and a scorpion, but against the spiritual powers behind them, Satan and his demons, all acting together to steal the crown. And what this assures us is that, yes, the battle is on, the struggle is on, but renewed Israel will overcome the enemy in the authority of Messiah, and Levi, the eagle, will have an important role in that victory I think that's an exciting thing to think about. So here's the sign of Levi that I think is actually more accurate as to what is going on in Scorpio. It's a pictographic sign of this Scorpio story that I've just shared with you. And in this, we have Levi rising up above the snake and the scorpion to take the division leader place in Israel. So here we have Levi brought into this place as the division leader, and this is as it should be. This is how things end up for the division leader here in this fourth division, now the division of Levi. In our presentation about the breastplate, what we noted is that the breastplate jewel, which looks like a snakeskin, also represents Levi, because the blue and gold colors, the colors of the Spirit, of the character of God, can equally picture Levi, if you look at it that way, whereas as a snakeskin, it's a snake. So it really is a perfect picture of either of these two at different times in history. Next, we look at the constellation of Libra. And one thing you have to realize about the constellation of Libra is that Libra, as we see it and know it today, is not the original sign as it was intended to be, as named by Yahweh. One authority says the association of this region of the sky with scales was established among the Romans in the 1st century BC. So the sign as we know it now, as we know Libra now, as scales, although a dramatic sign and one you could talk about, right, having to do with justice and all kinds of important things that you'd like to have associated with Israel, unfortunately, this was invented by the Romans relatively recently. It's not the ancient sign. Here's another look at Libra. Only I guess you'd have to say part of Libra, because this is really what Libra looked like originally, a much simpler sign. And it seems to be that it was about a libation. This is a word that is a Latin word that derives from the Latin word libatio, which means an act of pouring. It's really a sign of something being poured out. From the verb laber, to taste, sip, pour out, make a libation. The Indo-European root lib, interesting, libra, lib, to pour, make a libation. So I think what happened here is kind of a word play. They added a few stars, slightly changed the name of the sign, and now you've got the scales. But originally, this was about something being poured out. A libation was an act of worship in the form of a liquid offering, most often unmixed wine and perfumed oil. Interestingly, the pagans used libations to please their gods, and Yahweh also received libation offerings at the temple. But the word here doesn't necessarily mean, in its earliest form, a libation, because it means the act of pouring. It's pouring something out. Well, what is it pouring out? Well, this is the sign of Asher. And Deuteronomy 33 says, Asher's food will be rich. He will produce royal dainties. Let him dip his foot in oil. And really, Libra, in this most archaic form, it actually looks like a vessel pouring out a liquid, which certainly could be oil. Certainly could be oil. So again, we see a correspondence. As a matter of fact, if you look at that liquid dropping down and then kind of splashing out, it's almost like you're pouring it on your foot, isn't it? Kind of interesting. Burnham's Celestial Handbook quotes the star enthusiast William Tyler Alcott, who refers to this star, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, a major star that is in this constellation, saying it's the only naked eye star that is green in color. Now, interestingly, people can test this. Some people can see the green, some people can't. And that's a lot like olive oil. Some people can see olive oil as green. Some people just think it's yellow. Kind of interesting. I just thought that was interesting about that star in this particular sign. So this is Asher. This is the 11th Mazzaroth sign. And again, it's not hard to put these two together. So here's where we're at now. We have matched every single one of 11 tribes of Israel in order around the Mazzaroth. And they're all arranged according to their divisions. So very, very interesting to look at that. And we're left with only one sign. Let's take a look and see what that sign is. It's Virgo, the Virgin. We have one tribe left, Naphtali, the last tribe in the last division. Genesis 49, Israel says this of Naphtali. Naphtali, as a doe set free, brings beautiful words. Let's look more closely at this Virgo constellation. It lies in the southern sky. Its name means virgin in Latin. The last days, Israel is pictured as a virgin. Virgo is usually depicted with angel-like wings, with an ear of wheat in her left hand, marked by the bright star Spica. The name of the star Spica, which marks the ear of grain, means exactly that, the ear of grain in Latin. Now, isn't this a strange picture? You have a woman with wings carrying grain. This is interesting. But what could this possibly mean? Well, Naphtali, as a doe set free, brings beautiful words. Virgo, like a doe, is a female of grace and beauty. So this is really focusing on the female aspect of Israel. You know, us guys, we all have our feminine side. Israel also has a feminine side, if you will. Not that all the people of Naphtali are women, but it's showing us something about this tribe. Her angel-like wings certainly indicate freedom of movement, like a doe set free, right? Plus, the very word angel means messenger, bringing a message. That could be bringing beautiful words, right? Bringing a message. The grain she carries indicates her message. And being beautiful, like a doe set free, her message then is presented in a beautiful way, perhaps in poetry or song or literature. Artistic in presentation, beautiful words. Interestingly, about the wheat, the scriptures equate seeds of grain with the word of the kingdom. So that all makes sense, doesn't it? Wonderful picture here, picturing Naphtali as having been set free to bring beautiful words of the kingdom to the world and to Israel. Beautiful picture here. And there's a great deal in Scripture that connects up with this. You know, isn't it interesting how each of these tribes of Israel, both the ones like this that are indicating the best of Israel and ones that picture the darker side, these are all elements of Israel through its history. Sometimes, as in Virgo here, we have risen to heights of beauty and grace and truth. And other times, we've not done so well. And this is the story of Israel. And, you know, as you look at this in the Mazzaroth, this looks like something that comes from the Creator, doesn't it? Because just like His Word in the Scriptures, it tells the whole truth. It tells the ugly stuff along with the beautiful stuff. And you see that same hallmark or fingerprint of the Creator as you look at the Mazzaroth as it relates to Israel. I also find it interesting about this that you have this big battle going on in Scorpio. And this is the place where the battle is all settled up, right? And then you have these beautiful signs. You have Asher he's dipping his foot in the oil. You have Virgo with these beautiful words, freedom and the truth of the kingdom. It shows you a victory having taken place. It's really such a beautiful picture. It reminds me of Isaiah 52:7. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of they who bring good news, who proclaim peace, who bring glad tidings of good things, who proclaim salvation, who say to Zion, your Elohim reigns. Virgo is a beautiful picture of victory. Virgo, in a way, pictures our mother, Israel. It's time to return home to your mother. So here we have the fourth division. We have Levi as the commanding tribe. We have Asher, and we have Naphtali to finish off all of the tribes of Israel written in the stars by our grand creator. Here's how it looks, all finished. All 12 tribes of the breastplate match the 12 signs of the Mazzaroth. Are you surprised? It's the same creator that designed both, the breastplate and the Mazzaroth and the tribes of Israel, and wrote it all in the stars before man was even created. And enough information exists about these signs that we're able to do this presentation. This has been preserved for us through all of these many, many generations, centuries of time, millennia of time, so that we can put this together and understand how important Israel in her tribes really is to our grand creator. It's a stunning truth. And it suggests to us that maybe for a lot of us, we've been missing something in not seeing this. Truly, this is a profound discovery, but what does it really all mean? Because obviously it means something really important. Well, that's the next thing that we need to talk about. Now that we have put all these tribes in place, we see them in the Mazzaroth, we see them in the breastplate of the high priest, we're able to evaluate these tribes, we're able to evaluate this story, we're able to evaluate this relationship of the God of Israel to the tribes of Israel. What does it all mean? Well, of course, that's going to be our very next video in this series, The One and Only Nation Written in the Stars. Part 4 will be the coded message for mankind revealed. Do not miss this video. And if you've missed any of the earlier ones, please see this series at zion.net. That's TSIYON.net. Thank you for being with us today for this video. I'm very excited to have been able to share all of this information with you. It is the first time that all of this has been put together in one place. I just thank Yahweh, the God of Israel, for allowing me to be able to unlock and understand this truth, and for me to freely be able to share it with you. It didn't cost you anything to learn this. It's a gift from your Creator in heaven for you to be blessed. Thank you for coming and being blessed by this, and please be with me for this next video where we put this all together to see what this really means. Until then, be blessed.